Elsewhere, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to cut financial assistance to South Africa, citing its land policy and genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. The White House said Washington plans to resettle white South African farmers and their families as refugees. It announced that the U.S. will prioritize humanitarian relief, including the admission and resettlement of Afrikaners in South Africa through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. Trump has accused South Africa of confiscating land and treating certain classes of people, quote, very badly. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has defended the policy, saying it addresses racial disparities in land ownership. Land ownership in South Africa is politically charged due to the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. 3/4 of South Africa's freehold farmland is owned by whites compared to 4% by blacks, who make up 80% of the population. Right, for more on this, CGTN's Julie Shire is in Cape Town and joins us live this hour. Julie, what's been the reaction in South Africa on Trump signing that order to cut funding over basically land policy and the ICJ case?
Well, Mahia, this has been a reaction that has been met with strong criticism here in South Africa, especially by government officials. We heard President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking at the State of the Nation address, saying that South Africa will not be intimidated or bullied. So with reference to the land expropriation without compensation, that is a law that has been signed at the end of January, but it is a law that the government has come out to say that it will not be displacing anyone from any piece of land. It mainly has to do with usually abandoned property or abandoned land that it will be used for government uses. So there seems to be some misinformation here that Pretoria is trying to explain to the Trump administration that no one will be displaced or forced out of their land. You must remember that we go back to apartheid era when South Africa had huge problems and displaced many during that time, and that was the black South Africans, and they were not allowed to own land. And at the moment, South Africa still today, most of the land, as you mentioned, is owned by white farmers. But this contentious problem that South Africa is facing has to do mainly with abandoned land. And Pretoria is ready to talk to Washington and explain to them exactly what is happening. And in reference to the ICJ, South Africa feels that this is cutting the funding is like a political weapon against South Africa on its stance on Palestine. It doesn't mean that South Africa has an anti-America agenda. It has more a pro-Palestine view, and they would like to see the conflict settled. This also might be coming on the back of the meeting that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had with Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, just yesterday in America. So all of this news is coming a little bit too fast for South Africa. But also, I think we must mention that the funding that is expected to be cut to South Africa at the moment is from the USAID, which is the HIV and AIDS program, which 17% of that is for that program. South Africa, in case it has also raised questions about the African Growth Opportunity Act, which is trade ties, and that is in reference to agriculture. If that is to be on the table and something that is taken away from South Africa, that agreement is still on until December 2025. But if that is something that is going to happen because of these political tensions and divergences in opinion, that's going to have critical consequences for South Africa, especially in the agriculture sector. Yeah.
Right, and Julie, this does come after the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that the U.S. will also skip the February G20 talks. What kind of an impact will this then have on U.S.-South Africa relations, and how does the U.S. absence affect the G20?
So this just adds for a little bit more of layers of tensions. But having spoken yesterday to a few analysts, they said that this particular meeting coming up now on the 21st of February, where the foreign ministers from the G20 are going to meet, is not going to be so detrimental in this occasion. However, it's going to mean that South Africa might be looking to have more a global South agenda. It might look more towards its BRICS counterparts like China, Russia, India, Brazil, and that we're going to have less of a Western input if the US still decides not to be present at the conversations at this meeting. So what we can understand is that if the US does not participate, in this case, Secretary of State Marco Rubio does not come to these meetings, it's not going to be something that the G20 is going to stop and ponder on. They're really going to keep continuing the conversation on debt relief for developing nations. They're going to continue talking about climate issues, because that's exactly what the G20 agenda has to do. And South Africa, as the chairperson for the G20 in 2025, will continue with their schedule and will not stop. But to understand a little bit better what it means for South Africa and the G20 this year, not having this visit from the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, we take a look in my next report and understand a little bit better what could be the repercussions, Mahia. The decision by America's top diplomat to skip the upcoming G20 foreign ministers meeting in Johannesburg underscores the growing diplomatic tensions between Pretoria and Washington. Marco Rubio accused this year's G20 chair of being anti-American, a stance that has drawn widespread criticism in South Africa.
The US need to understand that the Global South is part of the G20. The African Union, as an international body, is part of the G20. So the absence of the US will not impact the G20 presidency of South Africa. With or without the US, South Africa and the African continent will still engage all the superpowers, and particularly economic trading powers, whether it's China, it's Russia, it's Brazil, it's European Union.
The diplomatic row escalated further when President Donald Trump announced the suspension of aid to South Africa, accusing the country of land grabs, claims that have been widely refuted.
We are concerned about the false information that is constantly being referenced by the leadership of the Trump administration, and we are still looking forward to the opportunity to engage with the Trump administration at various levels. A, to correct the information that is being referenced in relation to South Africa, in relation to what is happening in South Africa.
Despite US pressure, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa reaffirmed his stance in his State of the Nation address, making it clear that the country would not be intimidated.
We are, as South Africans, a resilient people, and we will not be bullied. We will stand together as a united nation, and we will speak with one voice in defense of our national interests, our sovereignty, and our constitutional democracy.
South Africa's vocal opposition to Israel's occupation of Palestine has further strained relations with Washington. Analysts are unsure what Rubio means when he says South Africa is anti-American.
What's interesting is South Africa's stance on Palestine, is not anti-American. It's just pro-Palestine. Palestine doesn't have any battle with the US. Its battle is with Israel. That is an occupying power.
Concerns are growing over the potential economic fallout of the diplomatic dispute, particularly regarding trade agreements. Trump's return to the White House has created uncertainty over the future, in particular of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Established in the year 2000, AGOA is a trade program that allows eligible sub-Saharan African countries to export around hundreds of products to the United States duty-free.
We've got huge risk if the United States of America withdraws funding from ourselves, as well as trade deals like AGOA. We export a lot of products from South Africa to the United States duty-free due to AGOA. If we're going to lose AGOA, we'll have a huge negative effect on an economy like ours that are already struggling.
South Africa has reaffirmed its commitment to strong trade ties with the U.S. and remains open to dialogue. However, Washington's shift towards nationalism under the Trump administration, marked by withdrawals from key global institutions like the World Health Organization and the United Nations Human Rights Council, raises questions about the future of international cooperation. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town.